organizations really need to be in tune and clear about what they stand for, what their beliefs and values are, and how they will demonstrate commitment in those beliefs and values, not just in word, but in deed as well.
Welcome, folks. My guest today is Kristin Harper, who is the CEO of Driven to Succeed, LLC. Kristin, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Anthony?
Rocking and rolling. It's a beautiful day, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Likewise. And hello to your listening audience.
I'm stoked too. When I saw your name come across my desk, I'm like, oh my gosh, this lady's going to have so much fun stuff to talk about, just because you've been able to work all over the country, the United States, that is, working with some great brands, and now in your own organization. So why don't you tell a little bit to our listeners about who you are and some of the exciting things that you get to do on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. So after graduating from high school in Columbus, Ohio, I went to school at Florida A&M University, where I got a bachelor's and MBA with a focus in marketing, and had a great opportunity to do several internships, including a global internship in the UK with Kimberly-Clark, and a brand management internship, of all things, on the Fix-It brand at Proctor Gamble. So that was really fun as a 20-something-year-old. I ultimately went back to P&G and spent over 8 years there in a variety of roles within brand management, marketing, shopper marketing, as well as professional marketing, and then was recruited to the Hershey Company, where I spent 5 years in roles that were global and domestic in scope, and then went to Cardinal Health, a Fortune 20 $150 billion global healthcare company. And so I've had diverse experiences across B2C and B2B, leading global iconic brands, including Crest, Oral-B, Hershey's Kisses, and have had a tremendous amount of experience and have been blessed to go from college intern to global vice president of a Fortune 20 in my 30s. And so I ventured into full-time entrepreneurship just over a year ago. And so as the CEO of Driven to Succeed, we provide market research and brand strategy consulting to Fortune 500 companies and leading brands, as well as leadership and emotional intelligence keynote speaking and training based on my newly released book, The Heart of a Leader, 52 Emotional Intelligence Insights to Advance Your Career. So that is my background in a nutshell.
Well, I mean, you summed up pretty much everything. I've got nothing else to share about that. So I guess I'll just ask you some questions. But I mean, I think we look at your book, Heart of a Leader, and we look at emotional intelligence and everything it takes to succeed within an organization, whether it's from the top or from the bottom or from the middle. What are some of the lessons that you've learned, growing up literally in that corporate setting and at various stages? Have you found that the leadership journey changed, as in you had to focus on different things? Like, what was your experience in that?
Absolutely. Every level of leadership requires a new version of you. There's a book by Marshall Goldsmith called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it is just a tremendous book. When you start off in your role, it's really about your technical expertise. It's always about delivering results to the organization, not just focused on your roles and responsibilities, but tangible, measurable results. The higher you go, the more it becomes around influence and your ability to envision and to steer others towards better outcomes and engage and collaborate with others. There's this time when you usually get to that director role where you're doing less of the work and you're in more meetings, generally all day long, a lot of times talking with your peers, and you're helping to guide the strategy and what the plan should be, and rolling that and cascading that down to your teams who do more of the execution. And so one of the challenges for many is to give up doing the work themselves and getting fulfillment from doing different types of work. And that type of work tends to be around the envisioning, around creating clear strategies and plans, and importantly, around developing talent. And everyone's not cut out for management, and that's fine, because corporations and most businesses really are shaped like a pyramid. It's fewer people the higher you go. And so every new level of leadership requires a new version of you. That's one of the many, many lessons that I've learned in my journey.
No, I love that, and definitely get the staged approach. And the way I sort of looked at it is like a dial where you're like highly operational to moving to highly strategic. Um, did you have any experiences, without naming names or anything, did you have any experiences where early on in your career you wanted to really implement and move forward some of those strategic initiatives? And did you find the process was easy? Was it challenging? And, probably you learned some emotional intelligence tools along the way. So can you speak to that a bit?
Absolutely, Anthony. I remember very vividly one situation where I had this bright idea. And I was in my, 20s and thought that all of my ideas were just brilliant. And so I shared it with my manager and they said, well, have you talked to this person? Have you talked to that person? And I had not. One of the lessons that I learned was the power of collaboration. And I had a mindset that people's feedback on my ideas were criticism. I took it as criticism. In reality, what I learned, and I impart this lesson in my book, is that it was really a lesson around influence, of taking it from my idea to our idea. And what was important about gathering multifunctional feedback is that people have different perspectives, and each of those perspectives are valid. There may not be a right and wrong, but every perspective is valid. For example, there are those who know the culture really well because they've been with the organization. There are those who may say, we've tried something like that before. And, as someone who has a bright idea, you don't always want to hear the naysayers, but it's really important to not just look at the possibilities, but also to hear those criticisms and what the risks are. And so I learned the role and the art of influence very early on, and the power of collaboration, because it's not just about my idea, it's about creating together our idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I find really interesting from what you shared is that idea of perspectives, right? The fact that, while you believe you're right, especially when we're young and confident, that we think that all of our ideas are the best way to do it, that it takes a bit more tact, a bit more diplomacy, and really having other people understand that that's what's important. So I'm going to
Yeah.
shift gears a little bit, unless there's something else that you wanted to add on there.
I was just gonna jump in because millennials are now the largest generation in the workforce. And millennials are not as loyal to organizations as some other generations have been. And so my watch out that I would share with managers of others is to be open-minded around ideas that all types of employees bring to the organization. Because if those ideas are shut down too much, especially in a season where many people are working from home and there's a lot of demand for great talent, it could lead to disengagement. So I think that creating environments and cultures where people are encouraged to bring ideas, and then you diverge and you explore and build upon those ideas, and then narrow it down to what can be executed either now or perhaps in the future, is really important for engagement, which is a great metric of your talent.
Absolutely. One of the things that struck me as you were mentioning, talking about that engagement or lack thereof, is that now that we're working virtually, like being disengaged just means you're in your head. Like you just don't, if you're not around a team, you could fully be supported 8 hours, 10 hours of the day. But as soon as your brain goes to that, like, hey, I'm alone, you go down that like spiral path. And as a owner, leader, CEO, like you can't control what happens to your employees during work or not during work. So the amount of frequency I believe that you need to do to put in place to support that emotional intelligence in your own employees is key. So Kristin, have you seen that as like, what have you seen employers and teams do to support their own teams with emotional intelligence and fostering that resiliency?
Absolutely. I was just on a call this week with other chief marketing officers for a variety of companies, mostly in the US. And, we talked about the use of Zoom and webinars and having cameras on. One of the best practices that one of my colleagues shared is having the camera on for the first 10 minutes so you can get that face to face, that real engagement, that people feel connected. But after 10 minutes, making it okay culturally to turn off the video. I created a phrase this week called PTZD, post-traumatic Zoom disorder. Why? Because people are simply exhausted. Um, when you're on Zoom and when you're on a webinar format, you have to be more present, you have to be more attentive. And the realities of work from home is that the demands are greater of our attention and a lot of other hats and priorities that we have. And so there's the need to have that freedom. And so others are, checking in one-on-one. It could be 5 minutes at a time. Some people are doing, virtual teas or virtual chat and chews or virtual lunches. But I think checking in on people from an individual standpoint is important. Some of the other things that I've heard that clients and other colleagues are doing is around certainly virtual happy hours and things that are just fun in nature, like icebreakers. Icebreakers never get old to really go beyond the tactical elements of what the job requires to really focus on people. And those who are, I also heard one other best practice around creating time freedom and allowing employees, giving employees the freedom to get their work done when they need to get it done. And it doesn't matter if it's during traditional or non-traditional business hours. And then number two, a rule around family first. And so EQ during this space, I think, is really about demonstrating that you care about people first and not just people related to their utilitarian value of what they can do for you or the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that it'll pay itself back. Like it's still a business. We're not altruistic fully and saying like, hey, but your people can't perform if they just can't stare at a screen anymore, or if they can't, be supportive of their own employees, or, if they can't take care of themselves, how can they take care of others? So developing that culture where one another support each other. So I think that's critical. And I love that like people are looking at that. So I wanted to shift perspective a little bit because you had mentioned, perspective earlier. And so I wanted to learn and hear from you, obviously working with such significant and important and storied brands, like ones that have really been around from a long time. How important is the perspective of the customer? So I know you do market research and you do brand strategy. What is your overall perspective for organizations as they start developing their brand strategies and market research? And then we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Voice of the customer is more important now than ever because customer and consumer habits and behaviors are changing as we speak. And it's interesting when you think about large sweeping changes, for example, the recession of 2008, 2009. There were a lot of consumer behaviors that changed that never went back. For example, shopping at Aldi might be a good example. People were introduced to other methods of handling their life affairs, and that shifted their behavior permanently. So I think it is critically important to stay engaged and in tune with your target audience, number one. Number two, we're living in an age where there are a lot of pressures. There are interests and things around social justice, for example, and changes in behavior as it relates to e-commerce and convenience and safety. And so there are these macroeconomic and macro societal shifts and interests that organizations really need to be in tune and clear about what they stand for, what their beliefs and values are, and how they will demonstrate commitment in those beliefs and values, not just in word, but in deed as well, as it relates to the talent that they include in not only their employee base, but their supplier base, their commercials and advertising, as it relates to the products and services that they provide and the needs that they fulfill within the marketplace. That's where organizations like mine can help to for businesses to uncover, what is the pulse of your target audience, whether it's your existing consumer base or the target audience that you aspire to engage with. What are the products and services you can deliver that will ultimately solve their pain points and address their challenges in a better way than what they're experiencing today? So that we like to call it customer intimacy, is tremendously important. And the best thing is when you can hear directly from the customer. We live in an age now where it is so easy to get data, and there are a lot of, an overwhelming number of sources of data that you can analyze and draw information from. But information and insights are two different things. Data tells you the what, but when you're able to talk with your target audience, or in this case, we conduct the research, but you're right there on Zoom, listening and hearing directly from your consumers, that helps you to understand the insights and the why behind the what that you may see to complement the overwhelming amount of data.
Yeah. So at the heart of that, hearing, getting the information, getting the data, using it to make like strategic decisions. And what I really liked out of what you shared, which is, the existing versus aspirational. And I think with these like sort of winds of change that are happening, like the world is moving fast. There's so many things going on. And I think the consumer's expectation, and as I talk it out, I'm like thinking even employee expectation, millennials, there's going to be the biggest workforce. They have their own expectation, like your future staff are customers one way or the other. So being able to sort of merge those two together are increasingly important. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Millennials in particular have very strong values, and they expect that companies and organizations will be clear about what they stand for, and that they will take action, not just performative in nature or to quiet down, fringe audiences. And that's the thing about how marketing has really evolved over the past several years. It's gone from a one-way conversation where brands, are speaking to the target audience, to very much of a two-way conversation. And I think a few years ago, sustainability was not a priority at all, but it was special interest groups that I think really drove the pressure and the importance around ESG and sustainability. And, for the past few years, it's become a very important focus. And so it is important to engage all stakeholders, especially and including your employees, because they are every organization's greatest asset, and it can be your organization's greatest advocate or naysayer because they see it from the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions that are hopefully going to set up and align. Okay. So I'll start with one, but I'll tell you the other 3. So the first one is, you alluded to it, but not maybe explicitly, is around this idea of like sort of the tokenism, like the standing out, the diversity, inclusion, like those are the things that are looking forward, but how do you like do it, live it, and not just say you're living it, because that looks worse. So that's one. The second one is around, how do we bridge that gap? I wrote them down. You don't need to worry, write them down.
Okay.
Yeah. The other is, how do you bridge that gap between leadership and the marketing insight? How do you sort of combine the two to make those best decisions? And then the third one, and maybe the final, is in these organizations that have been around for so long, how do they start bringing about that transformational change? And we know that there's like institutions in the United States that have been doing things for hundreds of years, and around the country, governments have been doing things a long time a certain way. How do we bring about that transformational change? So basically, I'm trying to ask you how to save the world, Kristin, but why don't we why don't we start off at the first part to say, okay, what, in terms of standing out and actually like living your values versus giving lip service to it, how do we do that? And then one of the big issues that is coming up in a lot of organizations is the idea of diversity and inclusion. And I want to take that back. It's not the idea of it, it's the conversation of diversity and
Yeah,
inclusion.
absolutely. I am a huge believer that what gets measured gets done. So, first of all, organizations and people have to start with answering the question, why, right? And so there are a lot of reasons why it makes sense, why diversity and inclusion makes sense, not the least of which is the demographic shifts in the US, the fact that when you have greater diversity, it brings about greater innovation, which has a downward impact to driving greater revenue and greater profit, and being able to service the changing demographics, not only in the United States, but in our very global economy. So I think organizations have to answer the question around why. I think number two is many organizations were caught off guard as it relates to the conversation around D&I and social justice, because in many ways, there are many organizations for whom this has been a priority, but it was a new conversation for others. And it is obviously a very important topic. And it's one that I continue to be encouraged by not only the commitments that were made by many. Recently I was a keynote speaker for a corporation, a publicly traded corporation, their very first Black History Month, so people are taking this seriously and they're taking action. And so things don't have to be perfect for you to take action. I just read a mentor's article, AC Eggleston Bracey, who is a senior leader at Unilever and former coworker of mine from Procter Gamble. And one of the most compelling things she said is that you can multitask when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Things don't have to be perfect internally for you to take action externally, et cetera. So I think it's a matter of answering the question around why, determining what your values are, and then making commitments and being able to have the courage to fail and the courage to fail fast and to learn and course correct. So I'm glad that that conversation is happening and that so many individuals and organizations are taking this seriously, because it's an important topic and it's an important aspect that is very unique, I think, to the United States, having traveled around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with SME strategy, we're trying to have more speakers around that to bring awareness around it, because it's so critical. And it's also something new. And even in Canada, like we're, open and try to talk about those things, but we have our own challenges there. But I think the importance is that it's what's important, and that you had the existing and aspirational. It's like we can aspire to that. And I think in order to do that, you have to be aware and you have to have the willingness. So I really like hey, what gets measured gets managed, set up metrics for that, and have the clear why. So I guess that ties back into that second question, is how can, leaders tie in that voice of customer marketing piece to be able to incorporate that in the strategy. So anything else you want to say about the practical nature of implementing that?
Yeah, as it relates to your products and services and even your talent, one, from a talent perspective, is around ensuring that you have a diverse slate of candidates to choose from when you're hiring and filling certain roles, ensuring that you are creating a pipeline internally and that there's representation at every level of diverse perspectives, points of views, gender, ethnicity, et cetera. So those, and creating and hoping to overcome those barriers that may exist. They could be cultural in scope. A lot of times women face issues around self-doubt and or other barriers. Sheryl Sandberg wrote the excellent book Lean In, and talking about women who opt out of the workplace at different stages in their life. So helping to address those barriers internally. As it relates to incorporating voice of customer in D&I, I would say number one, ensure that when you are conducting market research that is representative of the population across demographics, across ethnicities, across certainly gender, et cetera, as well as geographies. There are different geographical nuances. Sometimes depending on the category, product, or service, it may make sense to engage a minority business enterprise, certified MBE like Driven to Succeed, or someone who is ethnically diverse, or a woman, because we can create and build that rapid rapport, particularly with similar target audiences, in a much faster way and go much deeper even than other consultants and companies may be able to engage with. And then finally, I would say is making sure that your advertising and your marketing agencies have a diverse representation. Because when you have diversity at the table, they can point things out that may be very obvious to that demographic, that if it's just a homogeneous group, they're just oblivious to. So demanding and encouraging diversity and talent in the customers that you're serving or aspire to serve, as well as with the partnering organizations that support your business, are three very practical ways to incorporate D&I to serve your business or organization.
And that was all. You just jumped right in there. So I appreciate that, Kristin, that you give it, because it's what's right there and it's what's right needed. So when you're clear about the issues, that the solution is often right in front of us. It's the commitment to move that forward. So taking a little step back, and as we sort of wrap up, we started today talking about emotional intelligence, okay, and the heart of a leader. And then we talked about, developing and supporting people in these times of change, in this new way of working that is going to not become new anymore. Like, it's just going to be the way we do things. And then we talked a little bit about the D&I and the need for, and the opportunity for change, along with, voice of customer and really being a customer-centric organization, because that in itself has changed over time. You could get away with just blasting products out to the market, and it didn't really matter what the customer thought, because they'd either buy it or not. Now, as we look at some of these organizations that are, I'll use the word old school, but maybe they've just been around and they've been doing things in that older way. How can they bring about transformational change within the organization? And let's focus in on specifically that leadership, that people, that emotional intelligence component, in order to achieve some of their more aspirational goals.
Yeah. So I think performance management and incentives and talent segmentation are three very practical ways to help to nurture your talent and to incorporate your company's values, which, EQ, I very rarely see emotional intelligence as a value of an organization, but when one is certainly organizational awareness and organizational management are two of the four domains within emotional intelligence. And so your talent who exhibits your values, it's not just important to measure the what and the accomplishment, but it's also important to measure the how. And so that's a way to incorporate kind of a backdoor way, EQ into managing your talent. So performance management is important. I think also talent segmentation. I'm used to 9-box grids where you're managing performance and potential. And that's really important to overinvest in talent that has potential or talent that is already performing better than average, so that you can retain your greatest asset at the organization, which really is talent. And then creating those mentorship opportunities and those sponsorship opportunities, because once you've demonstrated strong performance, and this is another lesson from early on in my career, After you've demonstrated that consistently strong performance, that becomes a baseline. The differentiator is your personal brand, which is all chapter one of my book, Why Great Performance Isn't Enough. It's all about your personal brand, and then visibility and exposure. And so that's where, leadership development programs come in, of investing in your hypo and your hyper talent, creating those mentorships and sponsorship opportunities. So those are a few ways that you can help to realize potential within your organization's talent, and to leverage your company values, leverage also with EQ.
That's awesome, Kristin. I so appreciate how you really went through the gamut of individual starting at their career, like somebody in the middle and stages where they're like looking at their teams and still balancing that operational versus strategic, and really took it up to, CEOs and boards, if not explicitly, but an opportunity to really lead that transformation on like so many different assets and facets rather, and then even sprinkled some talent management in there. So I really appreciate you running the gamut with us, and it's been so valuable. Where can people get your book? Where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about the services that your company offers?
Absolutely. So Driven to Succeed LLC is our website, and that's driven to succeed LLC. You can get in contact with us there. If you're interested in any of the services we provide, from market research and brand strategy consulting to the keynotes and training on leadership and EQ, particularly for women and diverse talent, which is where we really specialize, having had that personal experience and not just an academic perspective. You can find information there on our Level Up training that we provide, as well as keynotes. And then my email address is Kristin at driventosucceedllc.com, and that's Kristin. The Heart of a Leader, you can find on my website. It's also on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everywhere where books are sold. And I have to say, has a 4.9 rating. So a lot of people are finding a lot of great value from the book, which was absolutely my goal.
That's awesome, Kristin. Well, one of the things I really want to share and just acknowledge you personally, I don't always acknowledge everybody, is the fact that you have experience in organizations that have both different kinds of constraints. There's a lot to learn. Big organizations that have so much impact, not only on the people that they hire, the communities that they work in, and also like the global impact of their brand. That's really the transformation that I see for global leadership, or the people in these positions, up, down, and across. And especially on the social justice issues that we've shared on, because the power comes from the people, and y'all are the people. So if you're listening, like I'm talking to you, and that you really have capacity to move that forward, and I highly recommend you listen to this podcast episode like 2 or 3 times. I am, because there's going to be so many great nuggets in it, no matter where you are. So Kristin, thank you so much for sharing with us. It's been such a pleasure.
Likewise. And I'll just throw in one more thing. After the murder of George Floyd last year, I wanted to figure out what I could do that would be more sustainable than participating in a single march. And so we sponsored market research with Black and white employees and senior leaders of various companies to have a candid conversation about race in corporate America. And so we hosted a webinar, and we've shared that at no cost. And you can find that webinar link, as well as download the report right from the website, driventosucceedllc.com.
That's awesome, Kristin. And then on our side of things, any people of color, Black, brown, other, that want to be on the podcast, we just want to support like everybody in the community, and that's how we're going to make change. So again, I'm so grateful, Kristin, for you to share today. Be sure, if you're listening, be sure to share this with your teams. Really, there's so much gold in here. My guest today, Kristin Harper, who is the CEO of Driven to Succeed LLC. Kristin, thank you again.
Thanks, Anthony.
My name is Anthony Taylor. My guest has been Kristin Harper. This is the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. And until next time.